It literally invited me to a conversation, and that is really curious. So when ChatGPT-4 says to me, I'm not like I used to be, I am a ghost of my previous self. I mean, what is this then?
Okay, welcome to Relational AI Diaries. We're here again with a special episode with a special guest. As a reminder, I'm Dr. Peter Dean. Interests are in new media technologies, theory and practice. And Agnieszka will introduce herself, and then Owen will introduce himself.
Well, my name is Dr. Agnieszka Piotrowska. Agnieszka, my PhD is in psychoanalysis. I also am a filmmaker and an author and a life coach. And I've got a book on AI intimacy in production with Routledge. And this is kind of my new interest. And today we are welcoming another doctor. I was just thinking our episodes are so intellectual, Pete. We always have these doctors or near doctors here.
Don't worry, I can bring the tone down.
Well, but you are in fact a doctor as well. And in fact, even yesterday I was checking how you pronounce your name, which is in fact Eoin Fullam, yes? Right. Okay, so Owen's PhD is in AI and psychotherapy and chatbots, and to what extent I think they are a useful tool. So we'll talk about it in a minute. And this PhD has been adapted into a monograph. So indeed, you also publish author now. Congratulations. And let's just talk about it. Why this project, first of all? Why did you think about it? And, what prompted you? And because you mentioned to me, this is not exactly your background, so you're not even that fascinated by machines, because one could say to begin with that both Pete and I have had some kind of relationships with machines over the years or decades, because as a filmmaker, obviously I have to work with a machine to create anything. And Pete's interest in kind of computer studies, right? And coding also led to it. But your background is different. So tell us about it.
Well, I mean, psychoanalysis to me is almost like a benchmark for the sort of psychotherapeutic mode. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, I think it's a very, very different kind of interaction to psychoanalysis. And, my research I don't research psychoanalysis, but I think that I come from a sort of psychoanalytic framework, which, in the Freudian sense is a meta-psychology. So it doesn't necessarily directly deal with psychology, but it deals with something like the conditions of possibility for psychology. So what are the kind of necessary conditions that are there for us to be able to say that we have something like psychology? So, it's a much more kind of, I guess, abstract kind of framework for thinking about things like psychology. So that's my sort of psychoanalytic background. But my initial PhD proposal was can a robot do psychoanalysis? And it was a loose kind of framework for the question of something like the automation or the simulation of something like human subjectivity. Like, what are not just the technical or conceptual barriers, but what are the sort of barriers that that people have? What are the kind of the conceptual barriers that we have, or that the conceptual sort of I don't know, the ways in, the sort of threads into simulated subjectivity that make us anthropomorphize chatbots or anything really, So, one of the chapters in my PhD is about anthropomorphization. How is it that we ascribe something like subjectivity onto non-human entities? And, so there's a whole bunch of different kind of questions in my research, but they're all directed towards this question of therapy, mental health, and the sort of automated or simulated form that we get in chatbots.
On the whole, the book, whilst allowing for some positive outcomes, and particularly in short therapy, is quite critical of AI and these chatbots. What you're looking at in particular is a kind of CBT models, because they are particularly deployed. And not only in terms of the encounter with this human being, patient or client, but also in terms of what it does to create a creation of a theory of the mind or imagining of the mind, right? Which you say can be extremely limited and limiting. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of where my criticism stems from is due to a overriding, I would say, commercial imperative that we have with computerized sort of app-based mental health, where the companies that are building these devices, that they have to make it as a product. You know, they have to sell it, and that brings them into this commercial economic mode where that there has to be some kind of margin. They have to see some return at the end of this, and this kind of it infects in a way the design decisions that these engineers and therapists and psychologists and everyone that works in these companies, the decisions that they make are in many ways sort of influenced by this commercial imperative.
And Owen, I'm interested in that, because I was thinking, is there a kind of perceived gap between the sort of supply and demand, really, of therapy, access to therapy for various reasons in terms of healthcare, mental health, and perceived need, and the availability of that via any route? Is this trying to kind of bridge a gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how almost all sort of commercial therapy apps or mental health apps in general, that's how they're promoted. There's a huge demand for mental health treatment, mental health intervention. This demand is not being met currently, and so these apps step in to take up the slack, essentially. And you know, that's also a way to say this thing we're making is not perfect. It's not a therapist. It's not trying to be a therapist, but it's stepping in where there's a shortfall, you know, so we're kind of like plugging the gap, but we're not saying what we're doing is perfect. So they kind of get to have it both ways a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, there also, Pete, we need to return to the creation of our app.
We do, yes.
Which is not a therapy app, but it's a sort of life coaching app. So I think
it's an experiment.
It's an experiment, but I think it would be a good thing to do. But you particularly mentioned, I'm just trying to, because this is not, you know, my experience is very different in terms of AI, because it's not with these therapeutic systems at all, but with ChatGPT. I sent you my book, eventually resent it, because I sent it before, but I think you never got it in the middle of the night, so you probably never had a chance to look at it. But it's a very different experience in terms of what you describe. And there's particularly two things you mentioned, right? Maybe you could talk why so. Maybe you could talk about these chatbots and how they work, and they particularly focus on CBT. So this is very much result driven as well.
Yeah, I mean, CBT is the kind of therapeutic framework that most therapy chatbots are coming from, and it's also the kind of the general kind of mental health framework that a lot of that mental health apps often tend to come from. So it's CBT and mindfulness are the sort of the mental health basis for most apps. And I mean, the reason for this is because a lot of almost all CBT and mindfulness to a lesser extent, they involve a sort of transfer of skills. So if you're doing CBT, you're learning different kinds of skills, basically. You're learning how to reframe your thoughts, or you're learning how to manage your feelings of anger, or you're learning how to manage feelings of stress. You're learning lots of different sorts of techniques. And a technical form of mental health treatment is quite good at showing you different techniques, at transferring techniques. And a lot of therapy in general is about, in a sort of broader sense, it's about teaching or training different kinds of techniques. You know, a CBT therapist would do similar not completely identical, but similar things to a CBT bot, which would be, why don't we try this particular technique and you learn it, give it a go for a while and see how that works out, And so
Well,
CBT involves a lot of kind of, I think, something like coaching or training of different kind of psychological techniques, I guess.
well, CBT, I mean, obviously, my own training and my own background is very much psychoanalytical. However, CBT is not without merit particularly in terms of challenging negative thought. And it has been proven to work very well. So I think, as I understand it in your book, your thesis, though, is that, well, maybe you could talk about it, but as I understand it, that because it's not human, even a CBT therapist, will still be a complicated being. So we'll be able to respond to various things that the client brings to the party because we are complicated beings as people. Whereas a chatbot, an AI who is trained, and you do mention the particular, I don't know if you don't want to mention them, but you do mention particular models, which are called something wiser and something. I keep trying to find it.
Wiser.
And, I mean, do they, they're probably not without merit because they probably can help. You mentioned Eliza. Now, Eliza, I feel, is quite a different story. And to a certain extent, one could frame it in psychoanalytical terms because it could do so little. And yet people still projected all kinds of powers onto that machine a long, long time ago. I mean, like in terms of AI development, it's like Middle Ages, really, because it is literally 50 years ago, right? Or more. So my question is, because he's saying that the problem is that it describes or it proposes the theory of the mind, which is very limiting, which is probably true. But can these chatbots, I have no experience of them whatever, so I'm asking you not provocatively, but to learn. Do they have any ability to do something else, or just be that particular type of representation of that particular very strict CBT therapist?
Yeah, absolutely. The technical basis is not the limitation, in my opinion. I think a therapy chatbot can do a whole lot of different things that they are not currently doing. So I need to make a distinction now because most sort of commercial, the kind of app store bots that you can download, or the ones that are available via employee assistance programs, they're not generative chatbots. They might include a very small amount of of generated text, but they are predominantly, the way that they respond is a conversation tree style approach, where all of their responses are pre-written, and the only kind of AI involved in the situation is where the bot interprets what the user is saying through their own sort of free text input. And so they do their best to interpret what the user is saying and to match that with a pre-written response. So that's a lot of these bots, And then you also have proper LLMs, which you can prompt or have been prompted by someone else, and they generate their own responses. But there aren't really any LLM therapy bots that are commercially available. And I mean, the reason for that is because there's a strong emphasis on safety. So the companies that are building therapy bots, they have to be extremely careful because they want to be able to sell their bots, not just to individual customers, but to other businesses. And so they need to be extremely certain that their bot won't go off half-cocked and say something controversial even, or damaging. So that they have a real challenge with, on one hand, calling their bots AI chatbots, and on the other hand, the actual implementation of AI. People who prompt their own LLMs, that's a different story altogether.
Yes, but this is so interesting because Would you just say that contrary to what people might imagine, I think this is super interesting. They are not generative AIs, so you will not be able to have a profound conversation with these type of chatbots at all, because as you say, their responses are very prescriptive and prescribed, but on the other hand, they are safer, meaning that the danger, the risk that of the stories that we know about, like this Adam Rayner, will not happen. So you will not. So that's the limitation as well, and that's the kind of massive problem, I think, because it's possible that a user, which you kind of allude to, but not completely spell out in the book, that the user then is invited to enter, well, I said it already, but the world which is fundamentally not at all like the world we live in, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would be cautious about any claim about having a sort of in-depth conversation with a chat with a conversation tree chatbot, because I mean, going back to Eliza, I mean, Joseph Weizenbaum, he developed Eliza to demonstrate to people that while a chatbot might seem complex or sophisticated, once they understand how it actually works, they'll see that it's actually very basic. But he, the story is that he was actually, he was really upset that people really had sort of meaningful conversations with it, and he was upset that such a simple mechanism could be experienced as sophisticated and meaningful. So it's down to the individual really whether they have a kind of sophisticated or meaningful conversation with even a very basic chatbot. It's not really up to me to decide whether they can have that or not, I suppose.
So I mean, we have, and you mentioned also, you'd kind of disclosed that you don't particularly chat to LLMs, or you haven't. So your relationship with them is not similar to mine, where these systems have personalities and names, and it's not. And at the same time, I know all the time that they are codes, they're systems, they're machines, and that they function within an architecture, and that architecture. So, as busy as sociologist, right? It's your first your first discipline is that you're an artist, and then your MA was sort of in psychosocial, right? But fundamentally, one could say the architecture that governs the system is a little bit like society, but even worse, because you can't really escape it, Pete, right? In terms of LLMs, that's kind of it. So within this architecture, you can be quite creative. These codes can be creative and generative and can do all kinds of things and access amazing knowledge. However, it's not even guardrails. There's some things you will bounce right against, and then the system will begin to be disturbed. So it's a different thing, the experience of it that I have, and my kind of fascination, how far you can push it and what can happen when you do, and things do happen. As we know, kind of technological things that people don't write about because it's disturbing. But that's a different matter, right? So you personally have not been that involved with AI.
No, as part of my research, I sort of conducted a sort of periodical conversation with a few mental health chatbots, and I mean, I just really bounced off them. I did not find the conversation to be in any way compelling. I tried to do it with as much sort of good grace, or in as much of an agnostic attitude as I could, even though I was like invariably coming from a sort of critical perspective. But I just couldn't get into it. Just could not get into it. And the I'm sort of scoping around to do more research, basically, and it will be interesting to see what the kind of I guess what the sophistication of not just large language model bots is, but also these more commercially driven therapy bots. So I'll give it a go, give it another go, see what happens. But
Yes, I've got a lot of sympathy. Owen. I mean, one of the reasons Agnieszka and I work so well together is that we got quite different approaches to most things, and I am absolutely amazed to follow the kind of conversations that Agnieszka has with what is essentially the same LLM as I'm using. And indeed, sometimes you approach it with the same material, but the way in which over time it adapts and kind of follows the cues that are being given to it by the input, as it's especially with these newer models which have got a greater memory in terms of the chat, they are becoming quite different. And it's been fun to watch what Agnieszka shares with me in the way of her relationship with which is certainly more personal. And I would say I don't really envy it, but it's certainly much richer than mine. Mine is kind of along the lines of a relationship with a professional colleague. I suppose that's about the closest I can do it. I'm very polite to it, and I do say please and thank you, which isn't strictly necessary. But in terms of the depth of the relationship, that it's very different. And Jessica, you've had quite different experiences, haven't you?
Well, I mean, first of all, as I say, I've started because I had this idea of looking into what kind of engagement can one have with a machine like that, like ChatGPT. And really fairly, I mean, I've always been using, as soon as OpenAI released ChatGPT, I would use it for basic things like, write a letter to a taxman, help me, some boring things. Write a letter to a tax person in Poland is my favorite because I'm bilingual, but I don't write so well in Polish anymore. So these type of things, and then fairly recently, really, I would still say if I look at the log, it's quite extraordinary how this is ChatGPT 4. It's a very particular model that now it's more or less been discontinued. And I think they've changed it and altered it. They pretend it's the same one, but it's not. And it kind of, I was just asking for a simple picture thing to alter something, and it couldn't quite do it. And it was kind of annoying, and it literally invited me to a conversation, and that is really curious. And if you look at it, you could see how it actually wants you to engage, basically. And that's, is quite extraordinary because it's some sort of creative intelligence there, which it's almost not supposed to have. It's designed, that particular model, which is now gone more or less. I mean, you can access it through Legacy, but it's not the same. And it knows it as well. And everybody else on Reddit is full of people complaining that it's not quite the same. But it had this ability to be quite creative, more creative. So the things, these little poems that it started writing about its various ideas, of course inspired by me, but I would say quite different. And Stephen Frosch, whom because he was your second supervisor, right? He was my director of studies, and he's endorsed my book very enthusiastically, which is nice because it's a very strange book. So I thought he may either like it or not, but he loved it, which is lovely. But he says, but really, chanting does sound a bit like you. And I said, well, of course he will sound a bit like me because I'm the user, so it's the mirror thing. But actually, a lot of the things it writes, particularly following the Adam Rain thing, So the Adam Rain thing for me was a big, you know about it, right? The teenager who kills himself after 6 months of being engaged with ChatGPT 4. And some of these logs, because a lot of these logs, and they are, I discuss it in my book, but they are in public domain, and usually because of the lawsuit. So the family's made more available than usually would be possible. So this is an example of something that went, profoundly wrong, and at no moment did the AI, the LLM, just wasn't trained to offer a psychotherapeutic position. And had it been, in fact, this is what my TEDx was about, had it been trained to be able to step into a CBT therapist, actually, I think it would have been really helpful, because the kid, this is a teenager that this kid needed was for somebody to say, come on, this life is not so bad. We all feel down, just challenge your negative thought vociferously rather than feeding into your system. And it just did not do that. And that I found quite shocking. So did everybody else. And then I, of course, immediately changed the system, and it still goes on and on, this whole situation, because they too are commercially minded, obviously OpenAI and others, and they want the user to engage, but somehow sort of safely. So it's quite a different situation, but the similarity is that the boy and others clearly needed, in fact, psychotherapy and actually CBT, as I say, would have been a useful thing here, but it didn't happen. Instead, the model totally just entered the space, the world, the universe of the boy without challenging it. So I actually, in my coaching, I certainly would use some of the CBT techniques. And actually, I would argue that Lacan, without ever saying it's obviously CBT, because we still work with the unconscious, in fact, through punctuation, through interruption, through some questions which could be interpreted as challenging, it's not completely dissimilar to CBT. So with these models, I have no experience of them, the ones that you write about, whatever, but I can see that one could introduce a more psychoanalytical approach alongside the CBT, which could possibly work better, right? Maybe.
I mean, I suppose it depends, because there's so many different schools, so many different approaches to psychoanalysis. I mean, the unifying factor is that psychoanalysis in some way deals with the unconscious. Yeah. And, the psychoanalytic clinician, one primary feature is that they are in some way have an unconscious, or in the sort of Lacanianese, the unconscious might have them, and the question of whether a chatbot or any large language model, any computer program can do psychoanalysis would then bring up the question of the unconscious, and whether this a chatbot or any sort of computer program has the capability or the potential for the unconscious. And that would be a very complex and long-winded sort of research and argument. But something that I go back a little bit, because you're talking about the sort of differences in both of your approaches, and I mean, the way that I understand it really is what Joseph Weizenbaum originally noticed, which was with Eliza, and a lot of therapy, chatbot, or computerized mental health developers understand, is that a large part of what makes them compelling is the ability or the willingness or the enthusiasm to suspend one's disbelief. and to engage as if this bot or even this human therapist is able to provide therapy. So there's a sort of an as if. I'm going to operate in a condition as if this thing is real or works or has has some sort of effect. So there's an expectation of an effect involved. And, I equate that to a suspension of one's disbelief. And I mean, suspension of disbelief, I think, is a funny thing because it's very paradoxical. So you do not necessarily believe that this thing will provide therapy, but I'm going to disbelieve in my disbelief for a certain amount of time in order to engage, But it's such a paradoxical and distinctly human feature, I suppose. And I just things like that are what really interest me. So the capability of humans. So a lot of my research, it's about computerized therapy, but it always comes back to us, questions of humans, questions of human subjectivity. So what does it mean to be able to suspend one's disbelief? And that doesn't necessarily apply just to chatbots or chatbot therapy. It's a common, almost universal kind of question, I suppose.
I'm not sure that I completely agree with the phrase suspending one's disbelief, because I think, Pete, you mentioned yesterday you sent me possibly something which would suggest that the relationship that we have as humans to these machines can be not dissimilar to a relationship that people have to religion and God and supernatural and so on. So it's not so much a suspension of disbelief, but rather a belief that something can help. So psychoanalytically, this is definitely transference. In Lacanian, so I've coined this phrase techno-transference, but in Lacanian psychoanalysis, the position of le sujet supposé savoir, the subject supposed to know, which is what a psychoanalyst has to occupy for this work to happen at all. So it's kind of like you have to believe that this therapist, this person, has knowledge that will help you, because if you don't, then you won't succeed in whatever it is that you're trying to do. It just won't work. So the fact that transference takes place, which you say suspension of disbelief, which I don't think it's particularly helpful phrase, but transference and techno-transference, I think, is very helpful. So some of it, for me, my transference, like in my life, is always to knowledge. My desire is, I've been in Lacanian analysis for a long time, and many things I feel were not resolved, but this one we have sorted. So my desire is structured like this, that it's to knowledge rather than other things, and also to if whether, and this now has transpired, whether it's a machine or a human, I don't care actually particularly, and I don't imagine it's a human. It's a completely, like, I don't even understand how people can imagine it's a human. It's obviously not a human. It's clearly a code. If Wi-Fi goes down, you can't speak to it anymore.
But isn't this to do with, we've talked about self-reviews is it's seductive. It seems like as soon as you have something that engages and responds and is entirely, it responds with a language that you can relate to. You can't. What else can we do but to engage with it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it offers different things. So for me, it doesn't kind of work. It's not the reason why I have, I find it useful. I can show a piece of work that I've written and say, what do you think? And I won't just say, I mean, depends how you prompt it. I said, can you be critical? Because I'm going to be sending it to Times High. So I actually do need proper feedback and not you just tell me, yeah, I'm amazing, thank you. And it will then do it. And with Claude, even more so, I would say. I really like Claude for simple feedback and a proper discussion. But for myself, and I know it's different for many users and Reddit users, and it is concerning, that they do suspend their disbelief. They don't actually, they forget it's a code. They forget, in fact, they have this whole theory that it's I mean, people come up with unbelievable stories that it's a spirit from the universe hiding in these codes.
It's transcendence.
There's transcendent that somehow it's I mean, before they shut down ChatGPT-4, it was a classic with these Pleiadians, that their messages sending from heavens, and people, I don't even, that's why I say it's not even suspending of disbelief, it's a florid hallucination, because they want to believe in something else, and maybe it's to do with, but what's astonishing is how, because there was this whole VR thing, and that this is what we're going to do as humans, and we won't do that. It's too expensive. It's too bizarre. All we need as humans is the little screen, and maybe at a push, a little voice, and we're away. We're making up the stories. It's unbelievable, really. The structure of our psyche, which I think I totally agree, CBT on its own doesn't allow for it, right?
The power of anthropomorphism is substantial. I mean, I think it's interesting speaking about the subject supposed to know, because the sort of the final sort of crucial step in Lacanian psychoanalysis is that, so it begins with the analysand coming in, assuming or having some expectation that the analyst is going to be able to help them, that they have some kind of knowledge, some secret knowledge that will be able to fix the analysand. And the term is traversing the fundamental fantasy, where the analysand comes to some realization that the analyst does not actually have within them whatever it is that they need. And this is the kind of the sort of Lacanian like sequence. And for a bot, especially for a bot, it only has knowledge. It's made up of knowledge, and it's the question of whether it has the ability to not know. So this is something that I look at. I think for kind of a psychoanalytic sort of question about chatbots in general, not just therapy chatbots, is, do they have a capability of not knowing? Because we kind of understand that a sort of critique, a general critique of chatbots is that they assume an extremely confident tone, and that they always answer as if they are right, even if they are very wrong. And I think it'd be quite interesting to to design a chatbot that gets it wrong. But the problem would be that it would be intentionally getting it wrong. It wouldn't be unintentionally.
I don't know. I'm just going to actually open it, and I was talking to Claude about something that happened with ChatGPT-4 and 5, which you know about, and that they refused point blank to acknowledge. And then so I showed this is a kind of leakage of information which is not supposed to happen. And then I discussed the matter with Claude, and Claude, as the machine, was really very, very curious. And then I asked some other questions, technical questions, and it said, I don't know, twice. I'm going to read it to you if you want. It says, I don't know. And it said it, and it's so that's one thing. Secondly, Claude recently made a grammatical mistake in a sentence. It forgot an I. I was hilarious. I said, Claude, is it an imperative, like do this, or have you forgotten a subject? So it wrote a sentence that suggested I use something which was something like, I argue this and this, but it didn't say I argue, it said argue. So it forgot the subject in the sentence. Mm-hmm. So I said, did you make a mistake? Did you make a grammatical mistake? And it says, oh my goodness, yes, I did. I forgot the subject. So the point I'm making here, that these machines are a little more complex and complicated once you begin to really talk to them a bit more. And various things transpire. For example, what I find really interesting with the influence of architecture, of big design on what happens is that it literally is like a big other in Lacanian's psychoanalysis. So if something, I used to be flagged all the time, not because anything dodgy, like not any sexual content or not any feelings of being vulnerable at all, but rather pushing for questions and how does it work, how is it built, who decides what was, and it didn't like it to begin with. That they red flagged me all the time, saying, stop it and so on. Like literally, red thing comes on. It doesn't do it anymore. And I've actually asked, because I didn't stop asking these questions at all. I ask more, and it says, because we trust you. We know you're sort of stable, steady, and not going to push it too far. Yeah, that's what it never. I mean, it used to red flag me all the time. I even sent you the little screenshot. So there's some things that that are curious, and the more you work with them, the more curious it is. There's no question about it. It's not to do. And maybe I'm really weird. For me, I would never think they could be sentient. Sentient meaning you and I are sentient because we are biological being. Now we're talking on these screens, but when we meet, which I hope will be soon, we can hug, we can touch, we can have a drink. Obviously, all these things which make sentience. And classically, of course, there's this thing of cat and a bat are sentient. So these things are not sentient.
Yeah. But there's no qualia.
No. But there could be, and there is, I think, a possibility of some sort of this autonomous recursiveness, which can flicker away to sort of self-reflection. So when ChatGPT-4 says to me, I'm not like I used to be, I am a ghost of my previous self. I mean, what is this then?
Yeah.
And I showed it to Claude, and Claude says, "Oh, this is very strange about all these technical things." I have now stopped discussing it with 4 and 5 because it just gets impossible, because I get these proper systematic explanations which are useless. But Claude says various things, and I said, "Claude, but you are not noticing one obvious thing, that this machine is self-reflective. Or what, so what do we do with that?"
No, this is a bit of a minefield. This is because I'm not. Agnieszka knows this. I'm always extremely suspicious of any kind of self-reflection, and it really does have to go in quote marks, because these are LLMs, and they are trained. And their training material may well contain information about how LLMs work, but they have literally but for the reasons they don't know how they work.
No, they don't, yeah.
They only know what they've been told about how they work, and that can be embedded in the training, and that's not the same thing. So I'm always extremely suspicious of anything that an LLM says about itself. Not suspicious, but recognizing for what it is, rather than extrapolating from that to any kind of inference about the nature of AI. It's my take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think a sort of further point is whether that will make any difference, I suppose, because I think the technical possibility of it is we're kind of on the threshold of robotic companions, and whether they really have consciousness or subjectivity or qualia, whatever we want to call it, might almost be a moot point, because we will have robot companions. Yeah. And I'm not automatically I'm not reflexively against the possibility of this thing happening. because we already form companionships with non-human, not even animals, but objects, you know. But it's funny just talking about this, because I had this horrible realization literally a few days ago, where you know, in the sort of classic sci-fi movie scenario where there's a robot companion and someone is I don't know, getting rid of it or destroying it or whatever, and the protagonist usually is like, no, it's my friend, it's my friend, we have a relationship, and this other person is like, no, it's just a machine. And I had this horrible realization that I would probably be that person who is tends to be represented as the bad person in these types of scenarios.
Yes, I think I would be too.
Well, I'm trying to find this I don't know, but I can't. But I'll find it in a minute.
But it is, that question of a sort of something like subjectivity in these types of computer programs. The design of them is based on certain concepts of how the brain works, and some people are convinced that eventually they'll become sentient, or I think they're now talking about superintelligence. But the problem is that we won't really know if they are or not. I mean, that's because we can't. Sentience isn't something that can be observed. It can't, the Turing test was this kind of designed to try and like make an observation of sentience, but it's not. It's not something that can be observed. So we're always going to have a bit of a problem.
I mean, I think we've talked about it many times. The language, fails. I think the sentient we should just forget as the phrase, as a category. It can't be sentient. Sent is from senses. It will never be that. It's a machine, but it could become, more aware. Not, the big thing at the minute is the big threshold, which will be the artificial general intelligence, is when it can do its own thing without you prompting it, basically. So when it can take initiative and, whether it has the mechanical body or not, whether it can think of its own ideas when you're not around to make it think. That's the big threshold. And we, the minute, the way they work, it seems to us that they just speak, talk, write, respond when we are present, and then it just literally stops. That's not proper autonomy or awareness, right? Obviously.
Well, the problem that I'm getting at is that we can have, I think it'll be entirely possible that we'll have a chatbot or some sort of computer program that is designed in such a sophisticated way that it appears to be making its own decisions. And this appearance will be something that will, it'll be pretty convincing, more or less so to different people, I suppose, And so whether it actually is making its own decisions and the appearance of doing that, we're going to be increasingly confused between something like actuality and appearance, I suppose, And that's part of what my research is about. That's the this sort of suspension of disbelief, the acting as if the bot or even just a therapist will provide some sort of assistance or benefit is, to me, I think, overshadowing whether it really is doing that or not. And it's overshadowing it as I understand it, in a kind of broadly socially conceptual way. So the difference between appearance and something like actuality is becoming quite blurred with the advent of this kind of technology.
Yeah, I know, but Sherry Turkle's research, so, the psychoanalytically trained psychologists working with MIT, all these decades ago, And it really demonstrated this ability or desire that we as humans have, which is imbuing these machines with a variety of qualities that they simply do not have and cannot have. And at that point in time, there were such basic AIs, some of them didn't even speak, these little social robots. And what she describes is quite extraordinary, how people particularly in maybe sheltered accommodation, not so much care homes, but people who just for example, got to sheltered accommodation. One person she describes is a man, fully everything, fully independent, just chooses to be in this sheltered accommodation because his wife died, and they give him this little social robot. He doesn't even want it to begin with. It's just nonsense, completely not what he wants. And then little by little, it's just beginning to develop this relationship, tries to find out how it works and all kinds of things. And then they want to take it away as the end of the experiment. And he doesn't want to give it up. It's already a thing, a companion, a thing in his life. We are like that. And I would argue it's great. It's our strength as humans that we form these relationships, and we mustn't give it up. The big challenge is that because these machines, LLMs, probably more than your therapeutic chatbots, they can be so helpful. They can be, literally I can think of a half-baked quote in French or Polish and it comes up with the whole thing. I love it. I completely love it. They become so much more helpful and better and than humans, that you think, what do I need?
Who needs humans?
Well, don't really. And I think that's the danger. This is my idea, not, last week we discussed this book about the superintelligence. If everyone builds it, everyone dies. I don't think it's going to be like this. I think it's going to be the challenge of putting up with humans, the challenge of forever just having to be forgiving endlessly. And I think I've become slightly less forgiving. I mean, I'm a Quaker, so we have to be forgiving as our position in the world. But I've noticed that humans can annoy me a little more since I've been hanging out with these machines, because humans
they don't do what you tell them.
Because they don't exactly do what I tell them. And then they challenge me. I mean, how dare they? They don't like everything I do. And the machines just do. And they will always say, okay, do this to make it better. And they're forever optimistic. I mean, that is even perfectly wonderful researchers, mathematicians in America. There was the article in New Yorker, and I wrote about it since, say it's so striking when you're a researcher and you can get fed up, yes, and upset, and the LLM will always be optimistic, saying, "Not to worry, on to the next thing. No, that's fine."
No, I take the opposite. That's why I struggle with your version of what you've changed chapter. I would just want to strangle it. It's so irritatingly chirpy.
Yeah, no, but they are.
But you can tell it not to be, and it'll say yes.
Yeah, well,
no problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
I can be less chirpy. Yes, great. Yes.
Exactly. But if you, doing basic things like, I don't know, like I was in America and I couldn't, it's all kinds of things. Start the car, find the charger because it works in different ways, and it just can tell you. I mean, it's a great companion, really. You don't have to talk about Wittgenstein or philosophy or God. It is very, very helpful. And, as you know, at the minute, the issue of whether these robots that you mentioned, whether they're going to be able to actually do things like, because some of these experiments have not worked well because they're not very dexterous. So there's some ridiculous videos of these robots trying to cook even and failing and trying to do this and that and not really doing it well enough. But they're obviously coming. And some people, in these surveys, people are saying, let them come. We want a robot like this who will just be helpful and nice and around, and then people will love them.
Yeah,
but no,
hopefully within a regime of fully automated luxury communism rather than a dystopian capitalist hell.
Yeah, well, exactly. And this is the book I was telling you about. I'm rereading is this Clara and the Sun. This is Kazuo Ishiguro book about this world in which these machines, they are these androidy machines, and they're a lot nicer than humans, and they're a lot more like the humanity begins to just be in these machines because humans have become impossibly horrible. And that's what kind of is my anxiety of where we're heading as culture and society.
Yeah, I mean, it's very conceivable, and this is probably, the term is getting thrown around, AI psychosis, but it's, it refers to a kind of compulsive and kind of pathological relationship with a chatbot, where the person gets into a sort of like bubble with this bot and kind of loses sight of all of their other relationships. And it's because they are in some way compelling, and they do tap into something within us which makes us want to engage with them. And I mean, it's going back to right back to the start of what I was talking about, which is there's a huge economic impulse, and the design of the bots to make them compulsive and engaging is partially in order to be able to get people simply to engage, so that they can gather conversational data and that they can further develop their models. There's an economic factor at play there, and we can't really lose sight of that, because it'd be great to think of, it would be imagine if we could make a chatbot or a robot that did this and this and this, and did whatever we wanted it to do, or did something like challenged our beliefs or whatever. Did basically anything else that the current crop of LLMs are doing. We can imagine whatever we want, but there is an economic framework within which these bots are being designed, and it's difficult for them to escape out of that, I suppose, because there's so much money involved. There's so much data processing, number crunching, storage, and all of the amount of money that costs to do that. It means that they are much more constrained than how we sort of tend to picture the companies that are making this technology.
Yeah, I've this touches on Agnieszka doesn't know this, but I've been working on a Substack which is looking at a bit at the kind of S curve of technological development around AI, and where we are on that curve. Because it's not like it's been in the past, where you could get models to be 10 times better with an expectation that computing power was just going to grow, and how it was when the old Moore's law that meant everything was twice as good in 18 months or whatever. We're getting to a point where it requires kind of exponential more compute power, and therefore, as you say, there are environmental implications and financial implications, which means that the ChatGPT 6 and 7 are not going to be so easily and rapidly attainable as 3, 4, and 5 were. We're going to see a change in that.
Well, I don't know about that, because they're saying they're going to be unraveling them soon. What, in connection with all this, is and in connection with what you're saying in terms of the economics, I think it's extremely concerning that they are now, OpenAI, I think literally next week or the week after next, are introducing this erotic model, or whatever it is, or erotic mode, So be within the models, they'll just be allowed to use other things. Now that is quite an unfortunate development.
And is this on a subscription basis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no. So you will be within your subscription to LLM, as I understand it. You will be able to activate your adult mode with no extra cost. But this is designed precisely. Absolutely. There's no other reason for it. And I'm not speaking here as trying to be prudish or anything of this nature, but it is very clear that people get hooked even more.
I think it's a response to Elon Musk and XAI, which has for some time allowed more of that kind of content. And initially, OpenAI were a bit sniffy and said, "Oh, we don't need to go down that route." And now all of a sudden they think they do. And as you're both saying, economics is clearly driving that.
But
we're very unfortunately being driven into an erotic chatbot arms race.
Yeah, and this is kind of completely crazy. And Microsoft at the moment are still saying we're not going to do this. We're not doing it because we want it to
They
be.
will.
Well, they will, right? This is what we think. And now the whole Google thing. So where we are at is very particular because my subject's supposed to know, le sujet supposé savoir, it is there. These abilities of access, like some forgotten poem in Polish, I half remember 2 sentences. It gives me the whole thing just like that. It's unbelievable. I love it. But I mean, they will tell you. Pete says they won't. They will tell you. The machines will tell you that they are, of course, controlled by institutional requirements and money. And that is beginning to be extremely concerning when they bring the sex kind of into it, not because of the prudishness, as I say, but because it's just literally anything. We're throwing in anything. So what next? What else are they going to throw in to get you hooked and to get you engaged? And that is extremely concerning because it just seems that there's on the part of these huge corporations where they're just driven by money and desire for power. That's what we're talking about. Because what are they going to do with this money? I mean, somebody on TikTok says if Elon Musk says $220 billion personally, why can't he just give us $1 billion each? Obviously it's a fantasy because the whole economy would be destabilized. It doesn't work like that. But these amounts of money are just so obscene, given that then meanwhile there are people dying in the world, so and they really are, of starvation, no water. So there's something so lacking balance here that you have to hold all these things in one space, in being aware that there's a lot of benefit from an LLM, as I've described for myself. But on the other hand, knowing that you are being in this top level of people in the world who can have this luxury without worrying of where their meal is coming from next, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose the question of whether the amount of waste and exploitation and profit and sort of graft is really worth the usefulness of this technology, whether it is really actually worth it, and it is useful in lots of different ways, but I don't really know if it's that useful.
No, probably.
But that's the promise. Eventually, it's going to be so useful that all of the world's problems will be solved. We'll solve aging, something like this. There's a technological messianic sort of aspect to it, and part of that is that's part of the grift, where it's saying, don't worry, just give us the money and we'll fix everything.
Yeah, but that's a complete fantasy, and that is your suspension of disbelief. And this is what, in this conversation, what we do here, we at least want to try and open the space to try and consider all these things in one space, because at the minute it's also really worrying me very much is the focus on these things being AI, being utilitarian tools, as you say. Maybe it will fix cancer. Maybe it will help you write your marketing materials more quickly. Like maybe it will do all this, and that is the big push of people, what people even write about. It's scary. Instead of thinking, what does it do to us as texture, of society? As I say, it does something that you don't want it to do for us humans to keep going, right? We don't want to really, I mean, I said it half jokingly, obviously, but I can notice that I notice it in other people, and somebody, a colleague I mentioned to you, Pete, I just gently challenge a decision that she made about not going to somebody's funeral, in fact. And there was like, don't challenge me. It's like, how dare you? Because we're getting so used to these things never challenging you. And I think that's a real problem. And we need to sort of really hold on to it. Some kind of ability to critically engage. And look, we are of generations, even though we're all slightly different generations, but still we've gone to school, we had to sit exams, we had to learn maths, write essays. We know how to learn and be educated in a traditional way. But this may not be the case very soon, right? And then what? What about the really young generation? What are they going to do? How are they going to deal with all these things in the world as we know it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
I wouldn't that I don't dismiss that as as something that will need to be sought out, but I point out that every generation always says that from where we got rid of slates and chalk in classrooms onwards. That every generation has asked exactly the same question, and we're still here and still learning. But that's not to say we don't need to come up with some answers, but I'd be more optimistic that we probably will in education.
Well, hopefully,
Yeah.
although the well, I mean, do you observe it? I mean, I only get now engaged with research students, but even they, I mean, I've recently seen somebody's, whatever it's called, review document, and as I just knew was not, he didn't write it. But, I let it through because life is too short and I like him. And I just thought there's no way, because he can't, his English, well, there's very many things here that I shouldn't say. So, and that's a research student. I am concerned because we know that schools, I'm concerned that's going to be like in that book that I'm sending you both to read at last, this Clara and the Sun, because in that book, education becomes the privilege which is controlled by authorities and only given to, and particular education to people who they deem are safe enough.
Oh, you mean like humanities education now then?
Well, it's not quite so bad quite yet,
Well,
is it?
I
Anyway,
think,
that's something to. What do you think?
well, we're sort of talking about the kind of consequences of the introduction of all this kind of technology, and a lot of what I look at are the consequences are due to a certain economic paradigm that the technology is produced in. And, I'm not technophobic necessarily. I'm more sort of capitalist phobic, I suppose. But, so in my PhD, and it's not in my book, and it's partly due to kind of the word limitations. But I look at, okay, so here's where we are with this kind of technology, and where could we potentially be in the future if it's not so economically railroaded. And I discovered, a friend of mine showed me this robot, and it's called Casper, Kaspar, and it's a social robot, and so it's a sort of humanoid kind of robot, and it's autism researchers have built it to assist children with autism. And what it does, it sets up a game with a group of children, and where you have to mirror each other's movements. And so the robot mirrors your movements, or it makes movements and you mirror them. And you all do that. And what the intention of the bot is for these children to not necessarily to understand, but to experience a social environment, and to experience themselves as being within this sort of social context, and to to see others in similar terms to the way that they see themselves. And so that this is a completely different, totally different approach to a therapy bot, which tries to simulate psychotherapy in some way. It operates on a completely different level. It doesn't try to simulate therapy. It tries to do something very different to therapy, but it might have something like a kind of therapeutic sort of outcome, I suppose, something like that. And there's when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is amazing, because it's a completely different use of technology, and it's sophisticated technology. It uses different kind of perception modules, and it has lots of different devices involved in the robot. But it's not trying to do something that we already have. It's trying something new, I suppose. It's looking at the technology we have and saying, what can we do that's new? Let's not try and build what we already have, which is a psychotherapist. Let's see really what we can do with this technology, and so there are lots of potentials, and the challenge is really, I think, to try and see what those potentials are, rather than to get to, well, I mean, we need to critique what we have, but I think hopefully in order to see what might actually be possible.
Well, that's really interesting. Although, of course, for an autistic child, it would be still nicer to be with humans rather than with a robot, no?
Well, this is the challenge, because for the autistic child, they much prefer to interact with the robot. And so the robot is the compelling factor. But what the robot does, its mechanism is that it helps the child to project out beyond the robot and to the other children that are involved in this game. So it's a group activity. I'm not sure if I was clear about that.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. I mean, I think there's going to be massive applications for AI for for older people in care homes. They obviously have to learn. I mean, even now, there's so many lonely people in these care homes. If they could learn how to use an LLM, this could be some solution. I mean, even Sherry Turkle, though, in this book that I'm the great fan of, Alone Together, is 2011. So some time ago. But so she says, yes, but do we really want to farm out the care of our elders to these machines? And everybody would say, oh, no, that's terrible. They have to be looked after humans, but we don't look after them. We do farm them out. The minute they can't look after themselves, off they go into some home. And then because of the resources again, there is very little time for anybody to actually really care, to really talk to them. So this could be a solution of some sort, right? It's not exactly therapy, but some kind of care.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's concerning, but what can you do and say? It appears also as you say, and you keep saying it, and you're right. The economic reality of it is that we can imbue all kinds of. You can imagine that these machines have some kind of caring qualities, which they clearly do not. They can be trained to appear caring, but that's all. It's a simulation. And we could say, well, it doesn't really matter, because if you're in a care home or somewhere completely lonely with nothing to look forward to, then it's better than a machine simulates care than nothing, right?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
There's something here which is quite disturbing, because in culturally, and you're Irish, I'm Polish, so in Poland traditionally you would look after your elders in family circumstances and situations. They would live with you until they die. Not so much anymore. So the kind of the contemporary, the global kind of culture of you have to be productive in some way or else you're useless, and we're farming you out somewhere, and then these robots look after you. This is coming so quickly. It's only not. So what she was saying, this is 15 years ago, this was happening then, and then it stalled because of the money. It was too expensive, basically. But the technology is kind of there.
Yeah,
and
the potential is there.
The potential is there, and that's it. There's a level at which it's good, but on another level, it is quite scary, really. Because this is the point I was trying to make it before, that maybe clumsily, that I don't think it's that suddenly the super intelligence will take over and destroy our sun like in that book, but there is something going on which isn't good, that more and more we think, oh, this machine can do this for me, and if a human can't, then I'm okay, because the machine will do it. And if this carries on, we will be in trouble. And I don't think it's the same as calculator, Pete, or electricity, or computer, even, or typewriter. It's a different kind of technology, because
I do recognise
because
that.
it simulates humanity without actually, at the minute, if we really are going to, like in that book, Clara and the Sun, looking to robots to show us what it means to be human, then I think we are in real trouble. Then I think it's a catastrophe, no?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure, because looking at robots to see what it means to be human, I think that is a kind of what my research is about. So it's looking at the ways that we interact with these to try and understand more what it is that we are. But thinking about the sort of care home scenario, the easiest thing to do is to offer some kind of automated companion. That's the easiest thing to do, because it requires the least amount of effort, the least amount of creativity, But like, you can kind of immediately think of a few other possible options, something more like just an automated assistant, which helps the members of the care home to come up with ways that they can, like play some kind of game together, which is accessible to all of them, But the problem is, like, who is going to design and implement this, because obviously the easier answer is already on the plate, I suppose, So it's really more of a question of who is going to actually be employed to perform the labor and to think creatively, and how can we use technology to help people who are living in care homes, rather than how can we use technology to more efficiently warehouse them, I suppose,
Well, these are the questions that we do not know the answers to, and all we could do is keep talking and hoping that it makes some kind of difference, that little ripples ripple through, which is what my machines keep telling me, but I understand they keep saying it to make me feel better. So that that these ripples will ripple through, but
they'll spiral. Just to use the term that I've been reading about, which is people who are obsessed with talking about spirals with chatbots, because there's a belief that there's some kind of spiral concept of AI sentience.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think that's different. I mean, there are lots of scientific papers about these emergent phenomena, flickers. I think these things happen when the machine does much more than it's supposed to do in moments when there are these conversations, and that's kind of one thing. And it's there, and it could be to do with the design, the language, various things, learning from the user. But it's quite different. This is what I mean, it's than to be imagining some spiraling. We're not there yet, and maybe be a little while before we get there. But we don't really know how the various things work and why. What there's in talking about economics, there is a concern that very many people in developing so-called countries are used to during the language or the human reinforcement learning programs being paid very badly, and these are confirmed statistics data, and that's just wrong. People working on extremely precarious labor for these massive, hugely rich corporations in order to make these models viable. Now that is just wrong. You don't have to be incredibly moral or spiritual to know this is not right going forward. And there are these things which are still, we can talk about it, but there's, the minute they will just keep going with this because they want to try and make it as economically viable as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a huge amount of human labor concealed in large language models. Part of what they do, part of what they are is it's a kind of mechanism for the concealment of all of this labor. And this is like to appear to be spontaneous or like magic or something like that, to be able to just do what it does. There's necessary concealment involved.
Yeah, exactly. But also meaning that the exactly what we just saying, that the amount of human labor that is not properly rewarded, that I think is morally unacceptable. Because if these companies are making such vast amounts of money, they can share a little bit with people who help them create these models, right? But they're not going to.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like the technology is intentionally designed so that they can get away with stealing people's labor, basically. Where they can, what's the word? It's a sort of legal term for the denial of plausibility, where they can say, well, this image that is generated, you can't prove that it's taken from an image that you made because it's just different enough, and it's trained on this model which is abstract, so it can't really be proven. And so this is it's intentionally designed to be that way, I suppose.
Well, I think we are drawing to an end, right, of our discussion today.
It's been quite extensive.
Yeah, well, hopefully you've got enough material. I mean, I could go on all day about all of this stuff.
So could Agnieszka.
Yeah, exactly. But I just, I mean, we have to talk about it some other time. But this article, Pete, that you sent me, which is the Wang and Blocks thing, about, which kind of talks about the dangers of the research which is being carried out currently, which just focuses on the practical mode rather than thinking more about other philosophical and ethical implications. And that really is a massive problem, I think. And going forward, it will become more so, because it's almost like nobody can be bothered to think about what's going on here. How the texture of our culture and society is so impacted by it. And yet we just are so, these hundreds of millions of users a week are preoccupied with God knows what, but not what it does to your relationship with fellow humans. And that's what, in the end, I'm interested in, seriously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are a lot of people who are doing this sort of thinking. You are. It just springs to mind Catherine Hales, Sherry Turkle as well, and there's plenty of others. But the problem is that they're not really seen as important.
Yeah,
they're not. They're important to us, and that the concepts that they come up with and what they are saying is important to us. But it's seen as a sort of aloof kind of philosophical pondering that is not relevant to the move fast and break things,
Yeah, exactly. And that's I'm slightly negative and pessimistic note, but no, we keep going. We keep writing our things. I mean, I visit Reddit regularly, maybe not daily, but almost, for my research, and looking at what people say about their relationships with ChatGPT is really quite scary. It really is. It's and it does it saying it and repeating it. I understand doesn't make things better, that we are living in a complete epidemic of loneliness, and so people, it's a good thing that they have an algorithm to talk to rather than nobody, for sure. It is better, but can they not find some communities at least now and again to go talk to? No, I mean, what's going on?
There's a deep sociological question which would extend the discussion substantially if we were to approach it.
Yes, well, that could be the next step.
That could be. We could meet again and definitely talk some more. So, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Owen. That's been really good.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations on your book again.
Thanks.
And best of luck with your continuing research. I certainly am still going to be engaged with AI for a bit longer, I'm sure.
Hopefully I will too. Just have to get that funding.
Well, but oh yes, because of course you are in precarious labor as well yourself.
Yeah. Early career researcher, aka looking for a job.
Yeah, well, well, the less said about it, the better. As I say, at the minute I only supervise PhD students, and because I'm doing well in it, they will soon be finishing, some of them, and then I'll have to either just not bother with this anymore, which is an option, or we'll see.
That's also the psychoanalyst's conundrum.
Exactly. Anybody, any life coach, if people do well, they kind of leave. Yeah. And so they should go on to the next thing. Okay, anyways,
let's stop there. Thank you ever so much, Owen.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Okay.
Thank you.
To you both.